And a good morning to all. MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Yes, it is a Sunday morning. It's 11 a.m. Eastern time. And I've made the comment a number of times that I really can't rest. I can't sleep. I can't force myself to go to bed until every college football game is complete for the night. Every college football game is complete for the night. I can't rest until that last second comes off the clock. Kind of had to break my rule last night. It was really not even that tempting to stay up for the Cal-Washington game, but I saw a 20-19 final. I was going to bed, and they had started playing the third quarter. Cal got on the board. It was 10-3 at halftime. Then they scored to make it, I believe, 10-10 about halfway through the third quarter, and I just had to say, I'm out. Woke up this morning, grabbed the phone, see that Cal pulled off a bit of an upset, 20-19 as a 14-point underdog at Washington. I was amused by the on-the-field speech by Chris Peterson after they had the long, lengthy lightning delay. I assume it was a lightning delay because that would be the only thing that would keep the players off the field for that long, unless it was a hurricane coming through, and that just doesn't happen up there. Some kind of lightning delay. And Chris Peterson came back onto the field after 2.5 hours and said, get your friends, get your family, get everybody back in this stadium. And by the looks of the stadium, he was about 10% successful. So a sparse crowd there at Husky Stadium. See the Huskies go down as the Pac-12 champions, defending champions of last year, losing to Cal 20-19. Number one, ND fan is telling us Washington would have won me 300 if they would have covered. Or, number one, ND fan, you would have won more than that had you listened to MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, and my prediction on the game. I did not pick Cal to win. I seriously considered it with the plus 14 on the money line. That would have paid off handsomely, but I certainly did not even think twice about taking the Golden Bears plus the 14 points. Definitely did that. So we will be here each and every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern time to wrap up the weekend and take your calls. 860-325-3687. What I am going to do is I'm going to carve through the top 25. I'm going to go through the top 25, lead you up to the NFL kickoffs at 1 o'clock Eastern time for you NFL fans, and lead us up to that point. And I'm going to rip through the top 25 and my impressions of the games yesterday. And obviously, I'm not going to go 1 through 25. I'm going to hit the hot spots first and obviously take your comments. And I appreciate everybody jumping online here. And some of you were actually with me late last night until about 2 in the morning. So good to see you. Clemson alum 98. Thinks Ohio State may look a little bit better than they did or than he anticipated. Clemson alum 98, Florida State, Miami, Michigan, Tennessee. We need some soul searching with these programs. Michigan, I would tend to back off on Michigan right now. Remember 1 year ago, Army at Oklahoma. Nobody questioned the Sooners. Nobody questioned them getting to the college football playoffs, winning the Big 12. And I know they've done it in recent years, and I know that that's not been the same history for Oklahoma in recent years as it has Michigan. Yes, Michigan needs to prove who they are, what they're doing, and that they're going to be a legitimate contender. That has to be proven, but I'm not swayed too much. Obviously, you have to take the results on the field, and you have to take the performance on the field. More so the performance, the results are what ultimately matters, but I look at the performance on the field, and Michigan's not looked good, questionably for week 1 and definitely for week 2. And considering their recent history and not being able to come through and win championships, I understand the comment. Makes total sense. Luke, we have yet to know if Ohio State is truly stellar this year. Cincinnati was a really good team last year. They were a top 35 to 40 team. I know that they were ranked in the AP top 25 to end the season, but we know what I think of that. I don't know that they were necessarily a top 25 team, but they were a top 35 to 40 team. I don't know that they're that this year, but Ohio State certainly manhandled Cincinnati far easier than I thought they would. Good morning, Luke. Number one ND fan on the line. The real winner of the weekend was Notre Dame. Pac-12 and Big 12 in serious trouble. The Big 12 in serious trouble. Well, Texas lost, of course. Oklahoma still in play. And without a serious competitor in the non-conference schedule. So Oklahoma needs the rest of the Big 12 to look decent, most notably Texas. And Texas played a good game. They were competitive. What would be bad for the Big 12 is if Texas would not have been competitive in that game. We see number one ND fans Washington betting woes from last night. Vodka drinker, were you surprised by the Texas LSU score? I was surprised by a half a point is what I was surprised by. No, I was not surprised. I picked LSU to win. I picked Texas to cover, and that was a difficult decision for me to make. I picked the Longhorns to cover, so I took the 6.5 points, and I did not need Joe Burrow completing a 2-point conversion with 90 seconds left in the game, whatever it was at that point. So that cost me. But no, I was not surprised by the score of the game. Are you talking about the points in the game? What was the final? The final was 44-37. Yeah, 44-37. Maybe a few more points than I anticipated. I didn't pick a score, but I picked Texas with the 6.5. I lost that one by a half in what was a really good weekend for me, considering I missed 3 games. 3 games by a half a point. It could have been a tremendous weekend. I am owed so many bad beats from the first 2 weekends. The same thing happened the first weekend. I lost 3 games with ridiculous outcomes at the end of the game, ridiculous plays that turned the point spread on me. Same thing happened yesterday. I went 15-9 against the spread. I will take that every week. 15-9 last weekend, meaning yesterday. 16-11 last weekend, week 1. So hopefully you're getting those picks. So get your picks. You go down in the description section below of any of the videos, not necessarily this live stream because I have yet to catch up with the description section. But the description section of any of the videos, grab the link next to Voice of College Football Community. Get my picks and a lot more. NCIS Fanatic 21's happy about 21-0. Luke, whatever you're thanking me for, you're welcome. Adam Byers, Ohio State looked good. Stanford did not look good, Jordan. They looked good in the first quarter. Then they collapsed, and USC's speed and playmaking ability just wiped them off the field. Mark, how do you look at Wyoming after what Mizzou did to West Virginia? So that's a good question. I don't believe that there's a direct connection there. We could make all sorts of connections and assumptions of how good teams are by making that A plus B equals C transitive property. We could put that into effect all over the place and we would come up with results that make no sense. So I understand what you're saying. Yes, it looks good for Wyoming. And I certainly put Wyoming in my top 25 based on their performance against Mizzou. Do I expect them to stay there? No, I don't. But as long as they keep winning, they will most likely stay in the top 25 if they have a better resume than the teams that I place behind them. So yes, that I think is to Wyoming's credit that they were able to beat a Missouri team at home and beat them more soundly than even the score indicated, 37-31. And then Mizzou turns around and they stomp West Virginia. Keep in mind, West Virginia beat James Madison by 1 touchdown. They could only score 20 points against James Madison. They turn around and score a garbage touchdown against Mizzou that was meaningless. So West Virginia, obviously, with Austin Kendall, a quarterback, has some serious, serious issues. And Neil Brown has inherited a program that basically hit its crescendo of talent last year, and all those guys left. The offensive weapons left. Will Greer left. The kid at left tackle, I can't come up with his name. It's like Yadni, whatever his name is. The left tackle, he left. And so West Virginia is pretty much void of offensive talent, except at running back. The mailman on the line. If you think Notre Dame is a winner this weekend, wait till the Georgia game. They're going to get blown out. I know that seems to be the consensus out there, that Georgia is going to manhandle Notre Dame. I know that they played 2 years ago, and Notre Dame did not have a passing offense because they had Brandon Wimbush at quarterback, completing 49% of his passes, and they still hung within 1 point. That was at home. Sure, that was at home. But without Ian Book at quarterback, and it took a late Notre Dame fumble that Georgia recovered for Georgia to kick the game-winning field goal. So that was 2 years ago. The personnel is much different. I get that because I make that claim all the time when people talk about teams playing a year ago or 2 years ago. So there's some consideration to that game, but much of it doesn't apply. MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark. It's Clemson alum. How are you?
Hey, Clemson alum. I'm doing just fine. How are you?
Not too bad. I thought it was kind of amusing. We were talking about that game that went so late because I woke up around 4 a.m. for some reason. And the first thing I did was I said, I want to see the scores of all the late games. And I went to my phone and brought up the scores, and I saw the game was still going on. So that was kind of funny. Yeah, just a couple quick comments. One thing I find it amusing this early in the season when folks are drawing so many conclusions off of one game or one drive. I mean, really the question is, who's going to be consistent over the course of a season? Who's going to stay healthy? And you mentioned the transitive property, and this kind of plays exactly to that, because teams improve, teams suffer injuries. We're dealing with 18 and 19 and 20-year-old kids who have things happen in their life. I mean, there's been times where a quarterback's had a couple bad games, and it's turned out the guy just broke up with his girlfriend, or the kid had a grandmother that died, and it was the first relative in their life that ever passed away. So there's just so many behind-the-scenes variables that we don't know, that it's very hard to draw conclusions off of one individual game. The question is, what do you do over the course of the season? So I would just caution everybody, we're 2 weeks into this thing. There are teams that look bad right now that will end up having good seasons. There's teams that look dynamite right now that will end up having bad seasons. So this thing's still early. I wanted to touch on a couple week 3 games. It's a pretty weak slate, but in terms of the ACC, just a couple things that are interesting to me. UNC plays Wake Forest. They're both 2-0. I think that's an interesting game. Those two teams do not play very often, although they're both in the state of North Carolina. They're not cross-division rivals, and UNC's in the Coastal and Wake Forest is in the Atlantic. So I think that's an interesting matchup. I mean, neither team is going to the playoff or anything like that. Let's not get carried away, but from an ACC perspective, it's interesting. I think UNC needs that game if they really want to contend for the Coastal. Although it's not an intra-division game, it still counts for their ACC record. The other thing I think is interesting, and I need to look who Louisville is playing. I think Louisville is perhaps a surprise team in the ACC because they were a dumpster fire last year. And to me, it looks, again, they haven't played anybody great, but it looks like they're playing fast. The quarterback play looks much improved. I think that's an interesting team. And if they could be an 8-win type team, that helps the ACC a bit, because they're a team that we can't have going 2-9 and stuff like that. In terms of Clemson, I think the defense is playing better than I expected, but the offense is not clicking as much as I had hoped. I think it will improve. Lawrence still looked a little bit off. I tend to think the offense will be okay as the season goes. I thought the defense was very interesting how they played A&M because they ran a lot of like 3-2-6 and 3-3-5 nickel and dime formations, and normally Clemson is almost always in a 4-man D line. So Venables saw something in the film that made him totally reconstruct the defensive scheme for that game. So I'm still trying to kind of figure that out from an X's and O's standpoint, what they saw and why they did that. But the thing that confused the hell out of me and a lot of my Clemson friends was, why did A&M not run the ball more? Because if you watch that game, there are a ton of plays where we've only got 5 guys in the box, and they don't run it. If you play Clemson and you put 5 guys in the box, we're gonna keep running the ball. So something there I'm still not quite understanding. There's got to be some reason why they weren't running on that five men in the box defensive scheme, because you should be able to run on that all day long. So I thought that was interesting. I think our defense played better than I expected. Part of that was Mon was pretty beat up. His calf kept cramping. And another thing was, I don't know how closely you watched the game, but there were a couple scenes where a trainer on the bench was working on his throwing hand. So I suspect he was banged up a little bit more than maybe we knew. So that might have been part of it as well. But credit to Mr. McDaniel. He's a guest on your show sometimes, and he has an ACC podcast. And he predicted that game exactly. He said Clemson would win, but A&M would cover on a backdoor cover, meaning Clemson was covering, but A&M got a touchdown in garbage time. So he got the game correct, he got the line correct, and he got the way it would unfold correct. Because if you remember, we were up 24-3, and then A&M got a late touchdown on some of our backups. So he pretty much called that exactly. I was hoping to cover, but I don't bet on Clemson, so it didn't really bother me either way. But just some thoughts. The Michigan, we've kind of gone back and forth on the Michigan thing. Wasn't the line on that about 28?
22.
22. Okay, yeah. So I got to push back a little bit on the notion that, well, we all knew it would be a tough game. Well, a lot of people didn't know it would be a tough game. Otherwise, the line would have been 22 points. But I was cheering for. I always cheer for the Academy. If I don't have an interest in the game, I cheer for the Academy. So I was really hoping those kids would pull it off. If I remember right, they missed a long field goal at the end of regulation to possibly win it. If I remember right. I was really disappointed they didn't hit that. That would have been cool. But I do agree, though. To list them with FSU and Tennessee, that's not. I mean, FSU and Tennessee are just, there's something wrong. I don't know what it is, but those two programs are just a mess.
I agree. It's played out that way for too long now. I have a little less concern for Tennessee than I do for Florida State, because Tennessee actually beat some good football teams last year, and Florida State did not. And Florida State played uninspired football and technically bad football from game 1 through game 12, and Tennessee had spurts of good play. Auburn, Kentucky, they stayed competitive against some other teams, but they beat 2 really good teams, Auburn and Kentucky, last year. Now, that doesn't help them for this year, but at least I've seen out of a Jeremy Pruitt program or team actually going out and playing a good football game, and I've not seen that out of Florida State under Willie Taggart now for 14 games.
Yeah, it's not good. Well, another comment. A lot of people are poo-hooing Texas. I have a different view on that. I don't think Texas has anything to be ashamed of. I think that was a battle of 2 very good teams. One of them had to win and one of them had to lose. I think it may be too early to write off Texas. If they were to run the table and beat Oklahoma, I guess it would be twice, right? If they beat them in the regular season and then beat them in the Big 12 championship and won the Big 12, they would have a depending on what went on across the country, Texas could still potentially have a very good resume. I think they need to win the conference and they need to beat Oklahoma twice, but it may be a little too early to write them off. I think that we need to keep an eye on LSU. That LSU Bama game is going to be very interesting. I don't know who LSU draws. They always draw Florida. I don't know who they draw.
Vanderbilt.
For their other. Okay, so that's a non-factor. I mean, I would personally love to see LSU beat Alabama because I want, obviously, aside from Clemson, I want to see some variety in the playoff. So it's going to be interesting. But Ohio State looks good. LSU looks good. I think the jury's out on Texas. Oklahoma looks good. It's all the usual players plus probably LSU and Texas added to the mix. The Pac-12, gosh, is Southern Cal now going to make some noise? I think that. Wait and see, I guess. That was a good win for them. Didn't they win by about 20? So it's going to be interesting.
Clemson alum, a couple things before I let you go. First of all, yeah, Mike McDaniel's coming on, has been on here. I'm still trying to shake the cobwebs, and I'm a late night guy that stays up till 4:30 in the morning. So these early morning, live streams, I get to get the mouth rolling. But anyway, Mike has joined us hundreds of times, I would guess, at this point, and so we appreciate his contribution. He's locked in on the ACC. I made the same call, so I was a big winner on that game with Clemson winning, and then the backdoor cover from Texas A&M. So I was right in the ballpark there. Hopefully, people caught my prediction on that. And keep in mind, I don't know if this slipped by you, that North Carolina Wake Forest game is not a conference game. Do you understand what happened there?
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that.
So
they scheduled an extra one.
They scheduled a non-conference game. This happened about 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay.
They were both looking for what would be a attractive non-conference game, so they're actually playing a conference team in a non-conference game that doesn't count toward the conference standings this week.
Okay. Interesting. I would say that it's probably still very important for UNC to keep this thing going, although it won't affect their chances in the Coastal. They need to keep it going. I'm impressed with them. I think we also need to be cautious on Miami because if UNC really is reasonably good, then that would mean that Miami has lost to two fairly good teams. And given the rest of their schedule, they could still finish with a very good record.
And lost to them down the stretch at the wire and have yet to play a home game.
Yep. So, although it's hard for me to kind of be forgiving with Miami because that's a fan base that I like to needle a little bit. But objectively, I think we need to wait and see. So it'll be interesting. I think, the ACC has looked bad in some spots. That Maryland game was an absolute abomination. I'm a Babers fan, so I really hate to see them get crushed like that. But I always say it. I'm a Clemson fan. I'm not an ACC fan. I don't wear an ACC hat. I don't have ACC license plates. I have a Clemson hat and I have Clemson license plates. So, from my perspective, I want the easiest path to the playoff. But I think every conference has some black marks so far. I think the SEC has several. I think there's some really bad teams in the SEC. Arkansas, the Mississippi schools. I still think the SEC East is. One of the people called in a couple days ago and was talking about how they play this tough SEC schedule, and they were an SEC East team, and that SEC East has not impressed me for a long time. It's pretty much Georgia and everybody else. I need to see more from Florida. I think folks thought Tennessee was going to turn around. They thought South Carolina was going to turn around. I think indications are neither has. UGA very strong, but the rest of that division just doesn't impress me. And of course, even in the West, Arkansas and the two Mississippi schools are you know. So I think there's been times in the last 20 years where the SEC has been much deeper. If you were to pull like the 7th and 8th teams out of the SEC maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I think they would have been much better than the 7th or 8th teams out of the SEC now. They probably still have, 5? Georgia, Alabama, LSU, Auburn. I think the jury's out on A&M.
But if you take, I understand the criticism that the SEC and specifically the East is not dominant. But if you take that division and you compare it to every other division in the country, it's as good, if not better, basically better than every other division in the country, excluding the Big Ten Eastern Division. So I think we hold these divisions to too high of a standard. But if we compare them against each other, I will take the SEC East against any other division in the country other than the Big Ten Eastern Division. If you take 4 of those teams out of the division last year and put them in the ACC Coastal Division, at least 4, maybe more, they win that division. If you take Mississippi State from last year or the year before or the year before or the year before and put them in the ACC Coastal Division, they win the division.
Well, Mississippi State's in the West.
Well, you mentioned Mississippi State not being very good.
I mean, are they?
I don't know this year. We have no idea that they're any good this year. They played 2 group of 5 teams.
I'm not,
but Mississippi State,
I mean,
I just think these are brief sample sizes, but Mississippi State with a backup quarterback took on Louisville with Lamar Jackson in a bowl game 3 years ago, beat them. Took on NC State, throttled them easily. Texas A&M took on NC State last year in a bowl game, throttled them. I just think that to just say that the SEC East is garbage, what is the standard? The standard must be the SEC West, because if it's any other division in college football, then I will take the SEC East any day over any other division in college football, excluding the Big Ten Eastern Division.
Well, I'd even challenge you on the Big Ten Eastern Division because I'm not seeing a whole lot out of that division other than Ohio State.
Okay, so Clemson alum, you've got to realize that you don't have any divisions left. If those 2 divisions aren't any good, then there aren't any good divisions in all of college football. And maybe maybe that's the case.
But that's my point. My point is that when I say good, I mean on a relative basis. So I'm challenging you that I think there's more parity in college football than you seem to think. So a case in point. Notre Dame loses to Clemson by 27 points, and all the talking heads on TV say that result should exclude Notre Dame from the playoff in the future. It was an abomination that they made the playoff because they lost to Clemson by 27 points. The next week, Clemson beat Alabama by 28 points. Now, I don't believe that a 27-point loss or a 28-point loss in one game should mean anything for the next season. It should be based on the merits of that season. But when people want to draw that conclusion for the result against Notre Dame, they have put themselves in a box and set a standard to where when that result happened, well, now Alabama lost by 28 points. By their own standard, Alabama and the SEC should be excluded from the playoff now. So I'm just saying, I think we need to be cautious on what we say based on these results. And you rattled off a bunch of bowl games and results from 2 and 3 years ago. True.
Well, we don't have any results from this year.
Well, we have 2 weeks.
But we don't have results between the divisions and the conferences you're speaking of. So basically,
we saw Miami play Florida in a very close game,
and we saw North Carolina beat South Carolina in a very close game.
Beat South Carolina. Yep, agreed. And so all I'm saying is I think there's more parity in the country than the narrative would suggest. That's all I'm saying. Now, maybe I'll be proven wrong as the season unfolds and as the bowl results come in, but we'll see. I'm not impressed with that SEC East aside from UGA. But maybe I'll be proven wrong.
So understand also, Clemson alum 98, that first of all, I wasn't in the narrative of putting Notre Dame in some kind of box of they lost by 27 points in one game, therefore they should be banished forever. So that wasn't me. But also I understand the critics' viewpoint because they're taking the program into consideration and not just that particular team, meaning Alabama has showed up time after time after time after time after time and proven to be either the best, the very best without question, or worthy of playing in a championship game. They've earned that, and they had one down game that they got blown out. Notre Dame has repeatedly gone onto the big stage over and over and over and over and over and over. And I know this is a different team, but that's where people come up with that narrative is we're sick of seeing Notre Dame show up on the big stage, be given that opportunity, and get blown away versus Alabama. Okay, this is a shock that this happened. So we're not going to take that all those years of credibility that Alabama's earned more than any program in the country and take it away based on one bad showing.
Well, point taken. One last point, and then I'll let you go because I want to tie it all together. And this is going to kind of go against your scheduling and expanded playoff ideas.
Okay.
Objectively, those things make sense. To objectively crown a true champion, those things make sense. But I think that when we go in that direction, we lose a lot of what makes college football special, and that is this debate that we're having. Because we know we lose. It's a messy, unique sport that causes these passionate debates and arguments. And when we really make everything objective and sterile with scheduling and with an expanded playoff and with a robotic seeding mechanism and a robotic slotting mechanism and a robotic scheduling mechanism, my opinion is that we then lose what makes this one sport different from everything else. And a lot of this debate and argument and passion that we're having will go away. And I don't want it to go away. So I'm going to be on the other side of that argument, and I'm going to say while it's sloppy, while it's somewhat subjective, and while at times it can be frustrating, I'm going to make the argument that all of those things are what makes it unique and special and different from everything else. And so I'm going to argue not to change the scheduling and not, well, the 4 and the 8 thing, I don't want to go above 8. I can do 4 or 8. Either I can negotiate on that one. I don't want to go above 8 for playoff. But I kind of like this thing with the 4 and with people getting locked out sometimes. I mean, just think of all the... There's a saying in politics that even if you're in the news and people are talking about you, even if it's a negative, it can potentially be a positive thing because your name's being circulated. And it's sort of the same thing where even if we see something that objectively seems like a problem, it's making the sport be talked about. And so just the mere fact that a conversation is happening is good for the sport. So that's sort of my view on that. Again, I'm not challenging you on the objectivity of it because I think your scheduling scheme and your playoff scheme are objectively the best. But I just think it takes away from what makes college football special.
Point well taken. I completely understand. I'm going to take a few of these other calls. Thanks, Clemson alum. I appreciate the call and excellent points. Thank you.
Bye.
Hopefully we still have those calls on the line. We had a couple coming in. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. I think we lost those couple calls. So 860-325-3687. Good points by Clemson alum. So I understand from the standpoint, if you're a college football fan who is an ambassador for the sport and wants the sport not to be pile driven by the NFL, and once the NFL kicks off, the NFL takes over. I heard a commentator make the comment the other day, this was Paul Feinbaum, that it's nice to have this week 0 game and then week 1 where college football is completely in the spotlight, because then the NFL takes over the world. And that's true to a certain extent, but college football is still arguably the second most popular sport in America. MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, this is Brian Rockwell calling, brother.
Hey, Brian. What's going on, man?
Hey, I just joined in on the stream here on YouTube. Lay it on me, man. Your personal thoughts on the Tennessee Volunteers, and I'm going to let you go, buddy.
Thank you. Okay, Brian, thanks for the call. So I'm going to go back a couple of years and say that Tennessee had a coach in Butch Jones who, by a number of measurements, actually upgraded the program temporarily. The program was in shambles to a certain extent based on their standards. And when we talk Tennessee football, if you're a little bit younger, Tennessee football standards are like top 10 all time. That would surprise some people that weren't around before 2007, that Tennessee has a top 10 all-time program. They are second in the SEC all-time in victories, winning percentage, and championships to you-know-who. So the Tennessee standard of football has been exceptional, especially if you take the time period from the early 90s through 2007. Philip Fulmer's teams dropped off, and he was fired. All right, there was Derek Dooley, there was Lane Kiffin in the mix after that. The program was in bad standing. Butch Jones was hired. Butch Jones upped the recruiting standards considerably, brought in a top 5 class, brought in 2 or 3 classes in the top 10 to 15 in the country. He had one particular season in which they took Oklahoma to overtime. They had a 2-touchdown lead on an Oklahoma team with Baker Mayfield at quarterback that eventually went to the college football playoff. They lost in the last few seconds to Florida and the last few seconds to Arkansas. They were that close to actually going to the SEC championship for a college football playoff berth. He went 9-4 back-to-back seasons and steamrolled Big Ten teams, like-seeded Big Ten teams in bowl games. So they had 2 good years under Butch Jones at 9-4, and they were only 1 season removed from a 9-4 season that was very close. Although some disappointment set in after the good 9-4, they had the disappointing 9-4 because the expectations of Tennessee fans became rather high, as you would expect. They expected the ascension to continue. It did not. And then Butch Jones' last season obviously was very disappointing, and based on the performance of the team down the stretch against the likes of Vanderbilt and Kentucky and teams that they shouldn't lose to, he was let go. Okay. You bring in the anti-Butch Jones and Jeremy Pruitt, who is nuts and bolts football, not a salesman, certainly can present himself in front of the media, does it rather well, but he can't wait to get off the podium and go recruit and go coach and instruct football. X's and O's football guy, no nonsense, versus Butch Jones, the salesman. Jeremy Pruitt turned in a football season last year that you would expect based on what we had at Tennessee the year before. It was a very uneven season, disappointing down the stretch. The last 2 games that they lost could have parlayed a bowl season, a postseason appearance that would have given it that successful first season look. You made it to postseason play after your predecessor, Butch Jones, did not. The program was in a bad place. You were like the 10th candidate or selection of the administration to become the football coach, and you brought us back to at least postseason play against a difficult schedule. But they faltered down the stretch, but they did have the 2 very impressive performances against Auburn and Kentucky, and that's one of the reasons why I distinguished Jeremy Pruitt's performance at Tennessee from Willie Taggart's at Florida State, because at least we've seen Tennessee play good football under Jeremy Pruitt. We have yet to see Florida State play any decent football. Okay, they beat Boston College by 1 point. They beat Wake Forest. But Willie Taggart's team has been awful, not prepared, uninspired since day one through 14 games now. Jeremy Pruitt's performance more uneven. Now they enter this season, and we could consider Georgia State to be an aberration. We will see. Certainly, Jim McElwain was able to win SEC Eastern Division championships and still lose to Georgia Southern. That was a McElwain team, correct? not a Will Muschamp team. Maybe it was Will Muschamp right at the end. But certainly McElwain had embarrassing losses at Florida and still won back-to-back SEC Eastern Division championships. But since the emergence of Kirby Smart and Georgia, that no longer will be the standard to winning the SEC East. You're going to have to be one of the top 5 teams in the nation, it appears, to win the East and surpass Kirby. But we're just looking for respectability right now. I'm not one to overreact. The first game performance was abysmal start to finish, considering the opponent and considering they weren't beaten schematically. I didn't see the game except the highlights. And then I watched like the last 4 to 5 minutes of the game because of what was going on. Anytime there's a major upset going on, I will tune away from a more attractive matchup to say, wow, Tennessee's losing to Georgia State. I got to see the end of this game. So I did not watch the game play to play. There were obviously more important games on. But as I understand it, and by looking at the box score, you can see that Tennessee was beaten at the line of scrimmage, manhandled up front where they could not block Georgia State's defensive front 7. They only averaged 3.5 yards per carry. So that's alarming. And then yesterday, they were in a dogfight with a BYU team that is not good. They're a top 75 team in the country, and they lost at home on a play that was blown coverage, missed assignment in the secondary, but the game should not have been that close to begin with. Now, I understood that it would. I believe that it would. That's why I took BYU in 3.5 points. So I appreciate the phone call. My decision on Tennessee and Jeremy Pruitt is that the jury's still out, but it does not look good. My standard for Jeremy Pruitt's football team at the end of the year, if I was making the call, would be simply improvement. Now, improvement typically is seen easily in the record improvement, but that's not always the case. For Tennessee, they've obviously gotten off to a horrible start, losing 2 games that they were not expected to. Most of us, including myself, projected, okay, difficult time in the SEC, but if they can go 2-6 in the SEC, they don't have a difficult non-conference opponent. They did not schedule one this year. They didn't have a Virginia Tech. They didn't have a fill in the blank that they've had in previous seasons, West Virginia last season. So they win all 4 non-conference games and they get to postseason play, and that's the formula for a next step improvement. But that's not going to happen now. Now they've got to win games that they're not expected to win. I would give Jeremy Pruitt, unless it completely falls apart, and then he proves to me he has no control over this team. He is not the guy that can turn this around in any such way. Then I fire him. If they go 2-10, and I don't see any redeemable qualities of him moving forward this program, then I fire him. If he turns in 3-9, 4-8, and especially considering the start, but they improve throughout the season, and he's starting to bring in another good recruiting class, which is going to be more difficult, obviously, based on what we're seeing on the field. It's going to be even more difficult for him to, without the proof of concept, to sell this program to recruits. I am not one to flip the switch based on one bad season. And I always think year 1 for any coach is kind of a year 0 for that coach. So Jeremy Pruitt would most likely be safe under me for 1 more year. And then next year would need to be the 6 wins, the 7 wins, get to a bowl game, get prepared for the bowl game, look decent on a national stage in the bowl game, play the better teams competitively, knock somebody off you're not supposed to, which he actually did in year 1. He beat an Auburn team. He beat a top 10 Kentucky team. So if you look through the history of college football, you will see a number of successful coaches who have not gotten off to great starts in their coaching tenure. So keep that in mind. And Jeremy Pruitt would be safe, most likely, unless I just saw signs of everything falling apart, which we do see signs right now. But if it comes completely apart, yes, there would be a possibility under me that he would be fired after this season, but most likely not. It would be next season that would be the season, D-Day, Doomsday, got to win 6 or 7 and compete. Hopefully that answers your question. I apologize to anybody that left any comments in the live stream, in the live chat, that I would have taken to air. But here's the deal. I can only go back about 10 to 15 comments, something in that range, 10 to 15, 20 comments to take them to air. So if you made some kind of witty, funny comment or a question in particular, I probably can't take it to air now. I can only see like the last 10 or 15 comments. And we had a lengthy conversation with Clemson alum 98. I will answer a question that I saw on the screen and I had on the screen for quite some time. Somebody asked, and I apologize, I don't remember who. Somebody asked, has any team gone undefeated, finished in the top 5, and not made the playoff? Okay, let's understand that there's only been a couple teams that have made the playoff undefeated. 2014, Florida State, undefeated, 4th ranked in the country because they did not look impressive. And so Florida State 2014. 2015, we had Alabama. No, we had Clemson undefeated. They, of course, lost the championship game. 2016, Alabama undefeated, lost the championship game. 2017, we had nobody undefeated. Alabama, Georgia, Oklahoma, Clemson. Everybody lost a game. And then this past season, of course, Notre Dame was undefeated, and so was Clemson and Alabama. So we've had Clemson and Alabama multiple times undefeated. Notre Dame and Florida State undefeated, get into the playoff. Nobody from the Power 5 has been undefeated, to answer your question, and made the playoff. Kyle, we appreciate you encouraging people to hit the like button. People don't understand or maybe disregard the importance of the like button. Maybe for somebody, maybe we could have somebody on here that's associated with YouTube sometime, and they could explain how we can blow up this channel, because it's some kind of complicated algorithm to get your videos into the traffic and so forth and so on that I've not completely uncovered. So hopefully I answered that question. Any other questions in the or comments we need to address in the live chat? Kyle asks, do you think people still are projecting Miami to have a brighter future? I don't know who those people are. They've only played 2 games. They barely lost those games. We will see how good North Carolina is. By all indication, they are much improved. Are they great? No. But they're much improved. They found their quarterback of the future. They found a coach who will maybe bridge to a up-and-coming coach. Mac Brown's not going to coach for 10 or 12 years. He's going to be around for 3 or 4 years probably. And they want to bridge the program, and he's fixing it and bridge to the young candidate who's going to be the next coach that they want to be around for 10 to 15 years. Butch Jones beat Florida after losing the year before on a Greer Hail Mary. Yes, and then they fired him after UF needed Franks Hail Mary to beat him the next year. Yep. BYU is overrated. I don't know who's overrating BYU. All right. A lot of infighting in the live chat. We love it. Trash talking college football. That's why we're here. Discussion, debate, analysis all the time. All right, let's look at the scores and see what happened. I'd like to see what happened with Washington and Cal last night. I know what the final score was, but what actually happened on the field, because I was rather pleased since I had Cal as a play at plus 14. And as we mentioned to Clemson alum, yeah, it is an oddity in the ACC schedule this year that North Carolina and Wake Forest are playing this week, and the game does not count in the conference standings. Here we go. Cal 20, Washington 19. So this is the second consecutive season in which Cal has defeated Washington. Took until early Sunday morning before Cal could run onto the field in celebration party with a few Golden Bears fans still hanging around and enjoy another victory over Washington. Greg Thomas kicked a 17-yard field goal with 8 seconds left, and Cal beat Washington 20-19. Game was delayed by 2.5 hours for severe weather. Pac-12 opener for both schools, capped by Thomas's short field goal. Severe thunder and lightning delayed the game early. Didn't start until 1:22. Oh, it finally ended at 1:22 West Coast time, 4:22 Eastern Standard Time. It was only the Bears fans cheering in a corner of the mostly empty stadium. So Cal beats Washington 20-19. I'm not going to go through the whole deal, but they were down 10-3 at half. Jacob Eason, 18 of 30 for $162 with an interception, so not a great performance out of him. Salvin Ahmed, the Washington number 1 running back, 21 carries for $119 and a touchdown. Washington definitely looking for a number 1 receiver. Aaron Fuller, 3 catches, 40 yards. Hunter Bryant, 4 catches, 40 yards. Cal, Chase Garbers, 11 of 18, so they kept it on the ground for $111. Cal threw for 111 yards and beat Washington on the road. Christopher Brown, 16 for 80. So this uncovers what's something that not a lot of people out there know, and that's that Cal has a top-rate defense. We knew that coming into this season, that they had a really good defense. Justin Wilcox majors on a defense. He is a defensive guru, genius, at a number of stops, including Wisconsin most recently, fielding number 1 defenses in the nation, top 5 defenses in the nation at Wisconsin. Now he goes to Cal, and they are suddenly playing great defense the past 2 years, and they only got barely 300 yards of total offense and beat Washington on the road. So what surprised me this fine football week 1, week 2, Saturday, Clemson defeating Texas A&M by 14. I was wavering on the point spread there. I finally pulled the trigger on A&M plus 17, but I certainly thought Clemson was capable of winning the game by more than that. But I did take the 17. Glad I did. Didn't have to think about Clemson winning the game. There's no comparison between the two teams, as we saw out there, and Texas A&M looked rather foolish, silly, and stupid, guaranteeing a win at Clemson. The Clemson defensive performance is something that needs to be taken note of by teams and fan bases and analysts across the country, because we questioned Clemson's defense, many of us. I was in the I don't know category. We'll have to wait and see. But having to replace what I would consider the best defensive line in college football going back to sometime in the early 90s with those Miami lines, I can't think of a better defensive line in college football, maybe ever. They lost the entire defensive front, plus key players in the linebacking core, Trey Lamar, and the secondary. They come back with basically 2 standout, really productive players, really star players on defense. So we thought that the offense would carry them early. The defense would catch up because the defensive personnel is still 4 and 5 stars. And then they just completely annihilate Texas A&M defensively. They don't give up a touchdown that's meaningful. They gave up a field goal. That's it. Clemson, dominant. The Alabama game doesn't matter. The Georgia game doesn't matter. Oklahoma, they beat South Dakota by 56 points. I can only imagine what Jalen Hurts' line was in this game if he even played more than a half. 14 for 18 for 259, 3 touchdowns throwing, and 47 yards rushing. Yeah. Oklahoma racked up 733 yards of total offense in this game. Okay. Not worth talking about. I will put the number up here as well. and let you know to subscribe if you haven't. 860-325-3687. Ohio State, I thought, was impressive, although Cincinnati may not be as good as we thought and not as good as they were last year. They did lose their best defensive player prior to week 1, but Ohio State was impressive, and defensively, that's their first shutout. I'm going to have to go back and include that in my Voice of College Football newsletter. So we may have had a bit of a mishap. I don't know if anybody out there has signed up for the newsletter, but week 1 may not have sent correctly. I had returned emails, which would indicate that it went out in my inbox, but then I had other indications from other people that it didn't make it to you. So we had a newsletter come out every Monday of every college football weekend last season. Voice of College Football newsletter. We would like to get that to you. So please send your email to mine. Send your email to MarkRogersTV at Gmail. I promise, my word, I will not clutter up your inbox with anything else. Just the newsletter each and every week with stats, facts, and trends that you won't find anywhere else. Channel update, but the stats, facts, and trends seem to be what everybody's after. Here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. MarkRogersTV at Gmail. Send your email to me. I'll get you the newsletter. The next one comes out hopefully tomorrow, Tuesday at the latest. The game we all talked about and I pegged is the best non-conference matchup, 45-38 LSU beats Texas. We talked ad nauseum about that game last night, and it deserves it. Michigan barely beating Army. Take into consideration that if Cole Talley, the freshman kicker for Army, who had never attempted a field goal, the first time that this kid is asked to kick a field goal, it's at the Big House with 3 seconds on the clock to win a game against Michigan and hand Army its first win over a top 10 team since 1963. That's a lot of pressure for this kid, and it wasn't a 22-yard attempt. It was a 50-yard attempt. So it looked like he had the distance, but just barely had the distance, but he pushed it right, just missed it, and Michigan wins in overtime. Their defense took over in overtime. The real deciding play in that game, I believe, was when Army had the ball at the Michigan 5. They had driven 60 yards running the ball. That's what they do. Anytime Army decides to throw the ball, bad things happen. And especially if they don't have a designed throw. If it's not a designed throw, for example, the quarterback fakes, he bootlegs, he has a tight end outlet. He knows exactly where he's going with the ball. Typically, you run the bootleg and you get the tight end who drags across the field and it's wide open. It's a specific throw for the quarterback. He doesn't have to make a decision. You do that. You don't run the play where the quarterback drops back in the pocket, then he's flushed right, and before you know it, he's 12 yards behind the line of scrimmage, and he misjudges his arm talent and thinks he can throw the ball across the field because he sees a guy in the end zone open, but doesn't realize that there's 3 Michigan players that have an angle on the football, and he throws it up for grabs, and it's picked off, and that 21-7 lead that could have been becomes Michigan with the ball driving down the field because Lavert Hill picked it off and gained about 35 yards. And before you knew it, it was 14-all. But of course, Army still had its chances to win the game. As Clemson alum or somebody else had mentioned that called, I'm in the same boat. When the service academies are playing, I root for them. Auburn beat Tulane in an uninspired game, 24-6, but key for me was that it was 24-6 by 18 and not by 17. Bo Nix, 19 of 37 for 207 and a touchdown. Boopy Whitlow ran for 98 yards. Florida wins 45-0. Utah 35-17 over Northern Illinois. We talked about the Cal-Washington game. Penn State was a 31-point favorite against Buffalo. They were trailing by 6 at halftime. They scored 38 consecutive points. They won by 32. So, which was good news to many and bad news to some of us. Oregon, 77-6. Got to see the yardage totals in this game. 77-6 over a Nevada team that just beat Purdue. Oregon threw for 402 yards. They ran for 221, so 623 yards of total offense to Nevada's 192. So complete decimation. Wisconsin beat Central Michigan. Did you see this score? 61-0. They were a 35-point favorite. They won 61-0. Jack Cohn hit on 26 of 33 passes for 363 yards and 3 touchdowns. Graham Mertz came into the game, 4 of 5. Jonathan Taylor, 19 carries for 102 and 3 touchdowns. Wisconsin threw for 400 yards. Wisconsin threw for 400 yards, basically against air, but they still threw for 400 yards and ran for 199. Wisconsin with 599 yards of total offense, putting up 61 points. Central Michigan, their quarterbacks went 9 of 24 for 43 yards. They averaged 1.8 yards per attempt, and they ran for 15 yards. 58 yards of total offense. That's going to go in my stats, facts, and trends right there that you will find in my Voice of College Football newsletter, which comes out on Monday or Tuesday. Mark Rogers TV, the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line?
Good morning, Mark. This is George.
Hey, George. You guys had a tough one yesterday.
Oh, yeah. University of Louisiana, Monroe, I think. No, that was somebody else's team. I can't even keep track of these teams. They're so. Who the hell did we beat? Tennessee something? Tennessee.
I'm gonna let you continue to struggle with this.
Yeah, it won't even stick in my brain, man.
Tennessee Martin. You can forget about it. You can just forget about it. It's gone. You did what you needed to do. Now you can move on to the SEC.
Right. The important thing is all of our quarterbacks scored a touchdown yesterday. We put them all in. They all scored passing and running, and all of our receivers, all like 20 of them, caught passes. And all our freshmen on every position got a chance to ball out. So it was a great day for practice. You know, we had a good practice yesterday.
Felipe Franks hit on 25 of 27 passes.
I know. Now everybody loves Felipe. Our fans really are psychotic, schizophrenic people. Let them do one thing wrong, you know. People just cut loose on that guy. It embarrasses me.
George,
he was like 14 for 14 at one point or something.
See, George, had I known this, that the result of this game would have ended 45-0, I would have had you put in a call because you're so influential with the Florida football team and with the program. Because I had an issue with this game, and it was that I had UT Martin and 44.5 points. Can you believe that?
No way. No way.
I needed your boys just to ease off the throttle just a tad.
Oh, my gosh.
I got burned by a half a point 3 times yesterday.
If we missed one extra point, we could have saved you.
That happened to me 3 times yesterday, George. I lost by a half point 3 times, and I still went 15-9 against the spread.
That is amazing, man. I can't believe Florida. We didn't cover. There was a 44-point spread on that game.
Yep.
Damn, and a half.
44.5. That's the one I saw. That's the one I played.
Did Alabama cover their 55-point spread?
No, they won by 52.
How about that?
Thankfully.
Those are hard to bet, those big spreads.
Yes, you are right about that. So I broke down my predictions yesterday, and 15-9 against the spread. But in games where the spread was more than 3 touchdowns, I was only 3-6. So I need to stay away from those games because they're just too hard to predict.
Yeah.
Went
it really is
12-3 predicting close games against the spread.
That's pretty good. 12-3. You can make a living off of that.
That will get it done. And what was my record? I went 25 games. I went 22-3 straight up.
Man, I'm going to start betting pretty soon.
Some guy, Alan V, he's a Georgia fan. I gave him my number. He's going to call me and explain to me what bank card works. I have friends who tried this, and it's offshore, and they just got their bank involved. They couldn't get their money. So until I know for sure what bank card to use, blah, blah, blah.
Absolutely, George. You're a smart man. You be careful because, yeah, people get ripped off. Absolutely, they do.
Yeah. Not because of the that now, but just, the bank card makes a difference.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, Texas has a nice stadium. They had a lot of fans. Did you see that shit? They must have had 80, 90,000 fans there.
Yeah, sure. I saw the game.
Yeah.
I thought I would check that one out.
They wore those ugly uniforms.
Texas.
Their uniforms look like 70s throwbacks or something.
Not a big fan of the Texas burnt orange.
I don't know. I'm just glad they lost. So Deep Bravo, calm down. I saw him in the chat section last night. He was still pumping Texas, saying we're still good and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, come on, man, cry a little bit.
I have no issue with anybody saying that Texas is good, but they're not at the level that he thinks they are.
Yeah, LSU, we got to play them at home at nighttime in their stadium. That's going to be a good game. I can't wait for that one.
Yeah, that should be a good one. You guys beat them last year.
Yeah, we got a couple tune-up games that are losable, which is, can you imagine losing to Tennessee? That's a must-win for us.
No, that better not happen.
Yeah, it's scary. And Kentucky, same way. They're not total slouches.
Yeah, you've got a 1-year losing streak against Kentucky, so you need to take care of that.
And poor Miami, the poor, proud Miami fans. Their life is over. They're so depressed. Poor guys. They don't even know what to say. I was nice to them all last night. But, I went on their thing and talked to them. But how sad. How the mighty have fallen. Mark Richt destroyed that program single-handedly.
Mark Richt destroyed the program. Mark Richt did?
They were 10-2, and then you lost like every game the next year, and now they're just discombobulated.
Well,
they got new coaches, new schemes.
7-6 isn't exactly losing every game, and he's the guy that was coaching them to a 10-2 record, and nobody's done that for 15 years. He didn't ruin that program. He just didn't improve it.
I just never liked Rick after I saw what he did at Georgia. He's just, he builds you up and then drops you off a cliff.
All right, George. Appreciate the call. I've got a few other people on the line here.
And as far as Texas goes, they'll always have Matthew McConaughey, so cheer up, Texas fans.
Yeah, there was a time during that game that I thought we would see more Matthew McConaughey than we would actually Sam Ehlinger or anybody else on the field.
Yeah, that was funny.
All right, George, I'm going to take this call. Have a good one.
Bye.
Press 1 to start the call or 2 to the call will start.
All right. While I look at the Iowa Rutgers box score here, MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good.
My name is Devin Banks. I reside in North Carolina, but I'm a Husker fan.
Okay. That was a rough one for you yesterday.
Yeah, man, that was I was at work when I was watching the game too, man. I was kind of heartbroken.
Well, depending on what you do for a living, that could be a little dangerous. So I hope everything's fine.
Oh yeah, no, everything's good. Everything's good, but losing to Colorado is never a good thing. Because then you gotta deal with the. I'm glad I don't stay in Colorado. Because then you gotta deal with the trash talk. Then you gotta deal with them. Like I saw my cousin. He was at the game, and he was getting go Bucks chants on the way out.
Well, that's part of the fun of college football. You got to You gotta pump your chest out and beat it and beat your chest and then do all those fun things when you win. But if you're that kind of fan, and then you got to take it, you got to show up and take it. If you suffer that kind of defeat like yesterday.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I just want to focus more on the team a little bit, but just from a fan's perspective, man. Yeah, those kind of games can make or break a team, in a season. And I think like again, like it's one of those soul searching moments for Nebraska. They got to go back to the drawing board, get back to work. I mean, that's the only way they're going to get better. Because you're right, on the road they're like what 1-6. I saw you mention that earlier on when he was covering the game. This felt to me like the Northwestern game a year ago when they were when they were up in that game, and it seemed like the momentum was all on their side, and then it just collapsed. And I think they lost that game in overtime. But they did rebound and go 4-2, but they were still losing close games on the road. I think the thing I want Husker fans to understand is that where we're at as a program is we're rising under Frost. The program is better under him, but we're still climbing out of a hole. Like for the last these issues that have taken place have been going on for like almost 20 years. I mean, going back all the way to Frank Solich, when almost immediately '98 we get dominated by Texas A&M. We're not even ready for that game. You look at the Colorado one, 2001, the year we played for the national title. We went to that same bowl, Folsom Field, that we lost on this past weekend and lost 62-36. So this has always been like an ongoing situation for a long time now, and so it's going to take some time to address a culture, in my opinion, because this isn't just an aberration. This is a culture. When you're losing games like this consistently, like stuff like this is happening on a consistent basis, a culture's in place. So a culture shift is happening. We saw Nebraska in the first half. They look like they look like a Scott Frost coach team. What you expect from Scott Frost, a physical team, a team that goes high tempo, puts up a lot of points, dominates the other team. I mean, Colorado didn't have any plays, didn't have really much of anything up until literally late in the third quarter, and because the defense was on the field longer because the offense stuttered in the second half. We saw them put up 14 points in the fourth quarter. Like when they feel like when they knew Colorado was coming back, they knew they needed to make plays. But like I said, the first half we really saw Nebraska surge on, but the second half we really saw we saw what's been going on for the last 15 years, and so unfortunate that the loss took place, but Nebraska's going to be okay. I still got, to be honest, I feel like coming into the season that we shouldn't have been ranked. I was talking to my father about this when we saw the rankings. I was like, "What?" I was like, "We went 4-8 last year. Why are we ranked right now?" Again, I feel like Nebraska was going to be a better team, but I'm like, we lost some seniors from that squad last year. A lot of new pieces in play. Some guys that are playing new positions. Cam Jerkins, our center, is a redshirt freshman. He came in as a tight end. He never played center before. So like we got a lot of guys in new positions that are still getting their feet wet, and it's going to take time for Nebraska to really establish itself. I think Nebraska's a year away from having that kind of season, that we're back kind of season. I think Nebraska's a year away. I think we'll have a good season this year. I'm thinking 7-4, maybe even 8-5, depending on if they don't address the road situation. I know they got a tough Maryland game coming up, and they just beat Syracuse 63-20. But if they can alleviate some of those issues and find a way to get a couple of those wins on the road, I'm thinking 8-4 with the chance to win the Big Ten West because it's still pretty wide open. Although the schedule looks a little bit tougher because Wisconsin's taking care of business. Iowa looks pretty good. And Purdue just got to win. Even Purdue, when they got that game on the road, they just got to win over Vanderbilt, and that's a team that's probably going to go 6-6 this year. So, looking at the schedule, looking at where Nebraska is, I think Nebraska's okay, but yeah, they're gonna have to definitely lick their wounds and recover and find a way to get better.
So I'm right on board with your shifting culture philosophy. I think Scott Frost is the right guy for the job. I think we've seen tremendous improvement in the program. Their nutrition and weightlifting program has taken effect and been upgraded considerably. He kicked out a bunch of guys, left the program that did not get on board with his tougher standards. That's kind of the first deal. As you come in, you set the standard, the expectations, and you see a lot of guys hit the exit, and you're fine with that because you're like, if they're not going to be on board, if they're not going to want to pay the price that it takes to win championships, then fine, we're better without them. So then you rid yourself of that element. I think that they're much improved, and I think they're a really good team at the skill position players. The defensive line is senior laden, but I think you found out in the second half that your offensive line still has some growing up to do, as does the defensive front. You gave up a lot of big plays in the back end as well.
Yeah, definitely.
You got completely torched in the second half. I don't know what happened there in regards to how Colorado woke up from being completely dormant on offense to throwing up 50-yard bombs one after another.
No, right. It's crazy. It's crazy. From what I sensed is watching that game, because I didn't watch the full game because I was at work, but I kind of watched clips here and there and kind of read up on it. Seemed like Colorado never really wasn't phased by what Nebraska was doing. You know what I'm saying? Like Nebraska was doing, even when they got 17-0, Colorado never really checked out of the game. And so like when all Tucker had to do was make a couple adjustments here and there, which they weren't big adjustments. All he did was focus on taking away the outside game. And when they did that, Nebraska struggled to move the ball because, again, with the new offensive linemen, they're still struggling to run the ball in the interior. They struggled against South Alabama last week, and they struggled again this week. So the run game is a prominent part of what Scott Frost wants to do at Nebraska, and it was a prominent part of what he did at UCF as well. When they are a way more dangerous team when they're able to run the football effectively, which they did in the first half. They couldn't quite get going in the second half because some of the adjustments or tweaks rather, they didn't really change their coverages or whatever, but like they kind of widened their defensive backs and they kind of put more emphasis on, hey, let's take away their edge game, let's take away the outside game because that's the only thing that's really killing us. And then I think they tackle better in open space, and I think that gave Colorado confidence. They start feeling like, hey, we could come back in this game, and so I think that was the turning point. I think part of the issues defensively is like because the offense sputtered in those drives, it kept the defense on the field longer, and so the result was when you're on the field for a long time and you're in that heat, because people gotta understand I play football. When you put on football pads, it's 10 to 15 degrees hotter on the field, especially if you're playing on AstroTurf. It's a little bit hotter than it typically is when you're just outside on a regular day. So when you're on the field for a long time and you got an offense that runs high tempo and you're going up against teams now where most teams run fast tempo, that's the other thing. Colorado went fast tempo in the second half. They began to do more no huddle situations. That took a toll on the defense, and when you get tired, your attention to detail, can dip off, and you're not as focused. So the result is a detail here and there could cost you a big play, like that flea flicker from near the back of the end zone where it looked like Nebraska was going to stop them, but because the guy, he didn't cover deep enough. Colorado was able to get past that protection and get that touchdown. So it was things like that throughout the second half that really bit Nebraska in the butt. And if they don't get some of these issues alleviated, it's going to be another tough season for Nebraska. I think they can get these things fixed. I think, to be honest, I think Nebraska played better against Colorado than they did South Alabama last week. They made improvements, but they got to make. They haven't made enough improvements to win these kind of games on the road, these rivalry games, these big time games, the media attention, winning these on the road. They got another opportunity next week against Northern Illinois, who gave Utah a scare. Utah pulled it out late, so they have another opportunity, and it's a game at home to kind of make these improvements. I think Northern Illinois will be a good test for them before they got to go on the road to play Illinois and Champaign, and which we shouldn't sleep on an Illinois team that's trying to be bowl eligible this year under Lovie Smith, who has a lot to prove this year. So there's definitely other opportunities, and I think Nebraska will take advantage of them.
So you bring up a good point about nobody looking over past Northern Illinois. You can't do that. They gave Utah a decent game yesterday, and Utah certainly has a program that's a bit more developed and at a better place right now than Nebraska. So that's not going to be a pushover game for the Huskers, considering how they performed at home against South Alabama. And then, of course, this game, the second half collapse against Colorado. So before they start thinking Big Ten Western Division Championship, of course, the Northern Illinois game doesn't factor into that, but you got to play well and win that game.
Yeah, it's just going to have to be 1 week at a time for Nebraska. They can't really overlook anyone at this point, because they're not good enough to overlook anyone. And we found that out even with a Michigan team that's ranked in the top 10 overlooked Army, and they almost lost in overtime. So it's just that kind of year where you week in, week out. And I think this is where the transfer portal has kind of helped a lot of teams. We had over 2,000 people that transferred last year. Well, some of those guys that were at Division I that weren't getting playing time are transferring to these smaller schools. So I think as a result, competition, like opening competition, in my opinion, has gotten better because of this. South Alabama has a lot of guys on their team that transferred from the Division I programs, from LSU and other places, to go to South Alabama to play. And so that's just one example. But a lot of these teams are benefiting from the transfer portal a lot more than people realize, especially the grad transfer. That's a big thing too. Getting a 5-year senior, an experienced guy that's played some Division I football, some big games on your team can significantly help the team. Look at what it's doing with Maryland. They got a couple guys that transferred from other programs, including Josh Jackson from Virginia Tech to Maryland, and it's really helped them on the offensive side of the ball. So it's just that kind of season where you can't really take nobody lightly, and you gotta be on your on your P's and Q's. But I think that's the exciting part of college football this year. That you got to come compete, and competition is always good. It just makes the sport better overall.
All good stuff, man. I appreciate you calling in, and hope you lock it in here, and we will give you as much Nebraska talk as we can possibly get to here in the coming weeks.
Yeah, man. Looking forward to it, man. I appreciate what you're doing, man, and covering, Nebraska football and all the other sports. I look forward when y'all cover other programs too. I think I do a really good job. So keep up the good work.
Thanks, man. Have a good day.
All right, you too.
So there is work to be done at my job later today, but before we get there, and I will be checking out the NFL and hanging out with my son, and my to-do list for Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, looks like this. As George mentions, right there it is. The top 25 that actually makes sense. So I'll work on my top 25 today. I have for several weeks been hoping to get out a reaction to your viewer comments. Need to do that as well. I have saved a bunch of comments that I found amusing or disturbing or enlightening or something. So I've saved a bunch of comments and I will respond to those comments in the next few days. I took notes because I was locked in. Whoa, we're almost falling apart here. I was locked in on Maryland and Syracuse early before it got out of hand. So I've got some comments about the Maryland program, which appears to be on a good place, on a good track, because they found themselves a quarterback. A lot more needs to be done, and they've improved because of some other areas. And it's only one game. It's only one game. Maryland will look like crap at certain times this year. They've not arrived, but with Josh Jackson in place, there is hope that they will win a significantly greater amount of games. Maybe 8-4 this year. Maybe 8-4 for Maryland. I picked them 6-6. I need to address the Miami situation and also the North Carolina situation. Let's not bypass what the Tar Heels are doing here, beating two decent teams, South Carolina and Miami, in close fashion, and the development of Sam Howell, and of course the work that Mac Brown is doing, and the presence and credibility that he brings instantly to that program. So I'd like to address that sometime in the next couple of days. Florida State and Louisiana Monroe, and what was almost a complete disaster, catastrophe for Willie Taggart. He avoids that for one more week, but it doesn't look good. Easiest team on his schedule, and that's what it looked like. 45-44. And then, of course, we will preview week 3 and all the big games. Let's give it a quick look. Week 3 and what games I'm locking in on. Hopefully some decent Thursday and Friday games. Nothing again on Thursday. Has okay, that's week 2. Why I pressed week 3 and it went to week 2. Here we go. Week 3. All right. Again, we have no Thursday night games. Has college football completely given up to the NFL? Is that what is happening here? For a second consecutive week, we have no Thursday games. Okay. Friday night, we've got actually 3 okay games. I would say 2 decent games and one that's at least a Power 5 matchup. So on Friday night, we've got North Carolina taking on Wake Forest on the road. Again, as I pointed out to Clemson alum 98, that is not an ACC conference game. So the winner of that game will not be given credit for a win in the conference, even though it's 2 conference teams. They signed a contract a few years ago to play non-conference games because both programs, Wake Forest and North Carolina, wanted more regional and regionally attractive games on their schedule. North Carolina at Wake Forest, 6 p.m. Friday night on ESPN. Kansas at Boston College on the ACC network, and Washington State and Houston on ESPN late. Saturday, we'll pick out the games that could be competitive and meaningful. Ohio State at Indiana on Fox at noon Eastern Time. Pitt at Penn State on ABC at noon. Will Tennessee beat Chattanooga? Kansas State, Mississippi State. The Bulldogs won in Manhattan last year, 31-10. This time they get the return trip from the Wildcats at noon on ESPN. What should have been played last year was the NC State-West Virginia game between Ryan Finley and Will Greer. We no longer have Greer and Finley in the collegiate ranks, unfortunately, so we're not going to have as good a game and matchup with North Carolina State in Morgantown to take on West Virginia on FS1. Also at noon, Temple, who destroyed Maryland last year, 42-10. This time the Terps, coming off that red-hot performance against Syracuse, goes to Philly to take on Temple. Also a noon game on CBS Sportsnet. So at noon, the game for me, there is not a number 1 game, but my 3 screens will start on Ohio State, Indiana, Pitt, Penn State, and probably West Virginia, North Carolina State, with a possible option to go to Maryland Temple or Kansas State, Mississippi State if there are blowouts elsewhere. All right. That sets us up for 3:30. Stanford at UCF at 3:30. Now, Stanford's coming off a bad second half performance against USC. They were up 17-3. They lost 45-20. They were outscored 42-3. Did I do the math right? Yes, they were outscored 42-3. Wow. So anyway, Stanford takes on UCF in Orlando. We've got Alabama, South Carolina in Columbia. That's a CBS game at 3:30. ESPN has UCF and Stanford. BYU and USC, and suddenly USC has some life and has some juice, and they should win in Provo, but that's a difficult place to play, and BYU's coming off an emotional comeback win against Tennessee in overtime. USC, BYU at 3:30. And that's basically our run of decent 3:30 games. Arizona State takes on Michigan State in East Lansing at 4 on Fox. Also, Iowa State on FS1. So during that 3:30, 4 o'clock hour, my number one choice, it's a tough one. I don't have a number one choice. My three screens are going to be on Iowa State, Stanford, UCF, and Alabama, South Carolina with the option to go to Michigan State, Arizona State, or BYU, USC if one of those games gets boring. Then our nighttime window, Florida, Kentucky at 7 o'clock on ESPN. We've got a lot of good games next Saturday. Florida, Kentucky in Lexington, 7 o'clock ESPN. Then we've got Syracuse and Clemson, which at one point appeared to be kind of the game to keep an eye on because of what Syracuse has done against Clemson the last 2 years. But I don't know, unless the Orange completely just did not show up against Maryland, for ABC to choose this one for 7:30 on Saturday night, Clemson at Syracuse. We've got TCU at Purdue on the Big Ten Network. That is going to be an intriguing game. TCU at Purdue, under the radar, really good non-conference matchup. Oklahoma, UCLA on Fox at 8 p.m. Nebraska, Northern Illinois on FS1 at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And late night, we've got Texas Tech and Arizona. We also have Oregon at home against Montana. Portland State, Boise State. So really late night. If you really want to watch football late night, you're going to have to go with Arizona, Texas Tech, because the other games, and even that game, are highly questionable. But a lot of good games in the noon, 3:30, and prime time windows coming up on week 3, and we will get to as many previews as we possibly can get to right here at MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. If you missed anything, we've got 64 on the line right now. If you missed anything, just wait for the video to post. Go back and watch what you missed. Again, I'm going to preview week 3, as many games as we can possibly get to this week. Also, my top 25 that actually makes sense. And because I've got notes on the games, and because I've got fan bases that really want me to address Miami and Florida State situations, I will do my best to get to those videos as well. Miami, North Carolina recap, Florida State, Louisiana Monroe, 45-44, and Willie Taggart getting lucky for one more week. And Maryland and their 63-point effort against Syracuse. And just one example of a fact, stat, or trend that you will find in the Voice of College Football newsletter is that Maryland, with its 79 points in week 1 and 63 in week 2, whatever that adds up to, 142, has posted the third highest scoring output through 2 games of any college football season going back to the beginning of the poll era. Trivia question: when did the poll era start with the AP and the UPI? Anybody? Anybody online? Anybody? The poll era, when did it start? And Kyle reminds us. Hit the like button, please. When did the poll era start? We're going in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 2001. 2001 curveball. You threw us a curveball. No, the poll era started in 1936. That's when the AP and the UPI started to rank its top 20 teams in the nation. So since 1936, only 2 teams have scored more points in the first 2 games of the season than Maryland. Hear me out. I just said 1936. Maryland has scored the 3rd most points, and of course they played Wagner the first week. So we're not putting it into context, just the fact. So those are some of the stats, the facts, and trends you will find in our Voice of College Football newsletter that we release each and every week. Voice of College Football newsletter. You can get it by sending your email to mine. Send your email address to mine. It's a fair exchange of emails. Send your email address to MarkRogersTV at Gmail, and I will get you out the Voice of College Football newsletter that comes out each and every week. Reasonable Gump. It's verified in the live chat that he got 1936 before I said it. Nice work there. And backing up his claim from last night that he is quite the college football historian, which I can verify from our conversations as well. All right. I appreciate everything you guys do. Hit the like button, share the videos, comment, subscribe, and of course, lock it in here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. I will be contacting bloggers, broadcasters, and writers to preview all the big games in week 3. And as I just read them off, I am quite impressed with the week 3 schedule. And we will get to it right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. And so lock it in and help us build the channel in all the many ways that you can do that. If you want my predictions, and keep in mind that I am 31-20 against the spread the first 2 weeks, 15-9 yesterday, despite losing 3 games by a half a point. I could have been 18-6. 15-9 against the spread is still well over 60%. 16-11 the first week, 31-20 is over 60%. They will win you quite a bit of money. You can get my predictions by grabbing the link in the description section that will be available below or is available on any of the videos next to Voice of College Football Community. So if you go to the description section of any of the videos and you find the link that says Voice of College Football Community, you go to that link, you sign up for our predictions and the other content we provide right there. And also grab the link next to the hashtag Sam Strong and you sign up for betnow.eu. Betnow.eu. It's right there. And you get 100% bonus to your account. So if you put in $1, they put in $1. If you put in 100, they put in 100. So if you start out the season by putting $100 into your account, it will instantly show up as $200, and you're playing in front of the sticks right out of the gate. So use the promo code as well, MRTVCFB, MRTVCFB. Use the promo code and sign up at betnow.eu. The link is in the description section below. Again, my college football predictions, week 2 predictions. So I need to amend that to week 3 predictions are available exclusively at our Voice of College Football community. The link is below and will be below in this video, but you can catch it in any of the videos in the description section. Also shop at Amazon. I know Christmas is coming. They tell me I can look at a calendar and see, even though I won't shop until December 15th or so. If you shop on Amazon, please use the link in the description section as well. That helps build the channel. Right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. I appreciate it. We will see you very soon with our top 25 that actually makes sense. More wrap-up material from the weekend and tons of week 3 previews. Keep it locked in. We will see you soon. Kyle, you are 31-4 this year. Well, I was 26-2 the first week if we're talking about straight up. Yes, just wins and losses. 26-2 the first week. Yesterday, I believe I was 23-2. So 23-2, 26-2, 49. I'm 49-4. All right. Now we sign off. We'll see you next time.